Yayoi Kusama. In this project, we're going to be looking at the symbolism of the pumpkin in Kusama's art. Known in Japan as a kabocha, pumpkins are positive images to Kusama because they represent a positive piece of her troubled childhood in Matsumoto. As a young girl, Kusama spent many hours drawing pumpkins, and to her, pumpkins are representative of stability, comfort, and modesty. For example, in one of her more current installations, All the Eternal Love I Have for the Pumpkins, Kusama featured her signature polka dots on a large yellow kabocha sculpture. Upon entry inside the closed room full of black mirrors and hallucinogenic lighting, the visitor was immediately transported to a world full of imagination and fantasy. Standing among the many pumpkins, one should have been confronted by an infinite energy, comfort, and warmth, as that is what the pumpkin symbolizes to Kusama. So our project today is going to be a pumpkin inspired by Kusama. We're going to make a dotted pumpkin with an infinity net background. We're going to start with a 12 by 18 piece of watercolor paper or mixed media paper, some oil pastels. I'm going to select a yellow and an orange one so I can decide later what color my pumpkin's going to be. I also need a set of watercolors and a pencil. Now you're welcome to sketch the pumpkin with a pencil to start with, but I'm going to use my pencil to mark a couple of dots to remind myself to make my pumpkin fairly big. So I put one dot at the top of the paper a couple inches down, one at the bottom a couple inches up from the bottom, and two from either side, trying to make it as large as I can. I want a larger pumpkin. I don't want it to be teeny tiny. At the top, I'm going to make a curved line a few inches tall, and then I'm going to make a second one that's almost identical, maybe a little wider at the bottom. I'm going to add an oval shape at the top. This is going to be my stem. And I'm going to add one more oval at the bottom here so it looks like it's a little more three-dimensional. Now that I have my stem, I'm going to start to add the sections to my pumpkin. The first section, I'm going to make a curve, and then I'm going to come out with another curve a little bit bigger. It's going to look like kind of like a wavy line. I'm going to do the same thing on the right side so that they match. That's going to be the center of my pumpkin. I'm going to make another section identical to the first, to the left, and then I'm going to make another one on the right hand side. I'm going to come out and around, in, out, and touch at the bottom. I'm going to make one more set of these little bumpy lines on the pumpkin. And my outside one, I'm not going to make the indent quite as severe. I'm going to kind of smooth it out a little bit. And to the bottom. Now my pumpkin looks pretty good, but it's a little flat, so I want to give it a little more dimension. I want to make it look a little more three-dimensional, like there's depth in it. So I'm going to add some small curved lines at the top, so it looks like my pumpkin's going back into space a little bit. There we go. Next, we're going to be creating our dot pattern on the pumpkin. I'm going to start at the center of the pumpkin, and I'm going to make one very large dot, and then I'm going to get smaller as I go to the top and the bottom. They're going to get tinier as they go out from the center. I'm using a black oil pastel, which is very sticky and very dark. They also run, so you need to be careful as you're filling these in. I'm going to fill in the first set of dots. Make sure that they're really nice and dark and nice and round. Take your time on this. If they're a little lopsided, it'll show up that they're lopsided. So try to make some nice little round dots. Next, I'm going to do a second set of line on either side. I'm going to do a small set here. These I'm not going to gradate the size of the dots. I'm just going to keep them the same all the way going down. And I'm trying to keep them as even as I can. One of the signature parts of Kusama's pumpkins is that her dots are pretty even. So as you're working on your dots, I'm going to give you a little tip. When I use oil pastels or crayons, sometimes they rub on my hand. So I'll take a piece of scrap paper or Xerox paper and lay it down on the drawing paper as I'm working. This way I don't smudge it and I don't get it all over me, and I stay relatively clean. So if you use a clean piece of scrap paper to rest your hand on while you're drawing, you will stop from smudging your drawing and you'll keep your hand pretty clean. Next, we're going to go to the next section of the pumpkin and we're going to fill in the dots. And I guess the tip here is to do it as a line of dots, where you're just going straight down the pumpkin and one following another like little ants. We want to keep that pattern, the little dotty pattern, consistent. And I'm going to do the same on the other section of the pumpkin here. So I'm going to speed up the film a little bit while I work on my dots. And we'll let you guys work on yours too. So you can see as I'm working on my pumpkin, I had a visitor decide to walk through and see what I was doing. Sorry, kitty. Bye-bye. And we're going to make sure that we get all the sections filled with this dotty pattern. We don't want to leave any parts empty. Great! Okay, next part. This is when you're going to decide if you're going to make your pumpkin yellow or orange. You know, truthfully, if you want to do purple or another color, you're welcome to do that too. I chose orange. I was not being super original. I decided to make an orange pumpkin. So I'm going to make some orange dotty patterns on the top of this stem. Great. I'm going to make sure all of this gets some nice little dots. So now we're going to work on our background, which is going to be what we call an infinity net. I'm going to be using some very straight lines that are in almost triangle patterns. So let me show you what I mean by a triangle pattern. So I'm going to be creating like triangle shapes and connecting them. So the easiest way to do this is start with a couple of triangles, connect the tops, do another triangle on top of that, connect the tops, and you can build this lattice or netting out of these straight triangle shapes. Similar to the work that we were doing with the tree-ish project that we did earlier in the school year. And I'm going to just speed this up a little bit. I don't draw this fast. And I'm going to just make the whole background all these little triangle shapes. So it looks like an infinity room. And I did decide to put the paper down because it was starting to get all over me. And that little white paper is a lifesaver if you don't want to be wearing crayon or pastels all over you. Great, now that I have the background done, I'm going to use my watercolor paint. I'm going to start with whatever color you use for the oil pastel. If you decided to do yellow, you're going to make a yellow pumpkin. If you decide to use purple, then you're going to use a purple color. We want to keep it the same as what you drew the infinity space in the background. So mine's going to be orange. I'm going to add a little bit of water to my brush. And I need to wake up the paint, so I'm going to swirl it on the tip of the brush. Try not to squish it. Very gently, swirly, 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 so that we've loaded the brush with some nice color. We're going to start with the center part of the pumpkin, and I'm going to paint right over the oil pastel. Now what's really cool about this is oil pastels and crayons, but particularly oil pastels, have a much oilier base. So if you use watercolor over it, the watercolor will not stick to that oil pastel because it's water, and water and oil don't mix, they repel, and the water gets repelled. So your pattern that you drew is still going to be seen even though we're painting over it. So I'm going to keep reloading my brush, and I'm going to paint this section in, a little water, a little more paint, and I'm just going to gently fill this in. Oh, and Kitty came back again. I think he wants to be a painter. So we're going to just keep painting that section until we fill it. Once this section's filled, we're going to very carefully do our other sections. And I'm trying to make sure that I don't leave any white spots. All right, fun. I've got the pumpkin pretty much finished now. I did the little back sections here. Now we're going to clean the brush off, a little bit of water, use a paper towel to kind of blot it off a little bit. And I'm going to go to my black color now, and I'm going to fill the stem in black. And again, because I use those oil pastels, they're going to show up. The watercolor paint is going to absorb into the paper, and the oil pastel is going to sit on top. And I'm going to now paint the background with the black as well, right over our really cool infinity net pattern that we made for the background. So I'm going to load up my brush, and I'm going to try to keep it off the pumpkin but go right up to the edge. And fortunately, that oil pastel will repel some of this watercolor, so even around the edge of the pumpkin, if you get up close to it, it shouldn't bleed into it. It should keep it away from the pumpkin. And we'll just finish this in. All right, well, this is a really fun project. I really enjoyed this. I hope that you did too. I'm just finishing up my background on here, making sure I don't leave any white spots. I'm just going to kind of go back over a few little spots here with a little more watercolor to make sure it's blended in. I'm really happy with this. I thought this was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it too, and see you next time in the art room. Bye, everyone.